They called her Wren, a name that barely registered in the daily noise of Fort Rains. She moved through hangars and flight lines with quiet purpose, hands always busy, eyes downcast beneath a faded cap. Most thought she was just another mechanic, someone assigned to the Apache maintenance crew by chance or paperwork. Officers rarely remembered her face, and the pilots barely noticed her at all. But the truth sat hidden beneath her collar, a tattoo only a handful in the Army had ever earned. No one asked how she got it. No one guessed what she could do. In a place that celebrated loud voices and bold reputations, Wren's silence became her camouflage. Wren's personnel file read like an afterthought. Her name appeared on the maintenance roster, tucked between supply clerks and junior techs. No flight hours logged, no combat badge, no record of advanced training. The file listed her as non-operational, a civilian contractor in all but uniform. For most at Fort Rains, that was enough. Junior officers barely glanced her way, assuming she was there to turn wrenches and keep to herself. Pilots passed her in the hangar without a nod, their conversations skipping over her presence as if she were part of the equipment. She worked the late shift, long after the day crews had clocked out, and the last of the sun's heat bled from the tarmac. In the far corner of the hangar, Wren could be found alone with a stripped-down Apache, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands blackened with grease. The others would see her silhouette bent over an open engine cowling or perched on the skids, tools spread out in neat rows. They'd shake their heads, maybe mutter about overtime or wasted effort, and keep walking. No one questioned why she always volunteered for the midnight repairs, or why her birds ran smoother than anyone else's. The truth was, Wren moved through the hangar with a familiarity that didn't match her file. She ran diagnostics by touch and sound, fingers trailing over wiring harnesses and control rods, with an assurance that came from more than just technical manuals. She knew every panel, every rivet, every system warning light. Once, a new crew chief caught her mid-checklist and asked if she'd ever considered applying for a flight slot. Wren just shrugged, eyes on the instrument panel, and let the question hang in the air. The chief didn't press. Around here, questions about backgrounds and qualifications rarely got answers. At mealtimes, Wren sat at the edge of the mess hall, her tray balanced on a knee, eyes scanning schematics or maintenance logs. The tables around her filled with laughter and stories from the flight line. But she stayed on the periphery, content to let the noise pass her by. Occasionally, someone would mistake her for a new contractor and ask for a wrench or a spare part. She'd hand it over without a word, her expression unreadable. If anyone had looked closer, they might have noticed the tattoo at the base of her neck when she tied her hair up against the heat. Faded but unmistakable, it marked her as someone who'd earned more than her file suggested. But no one at Fort Rains was looking for ghosts in the maintenance bay. The routines of the post moved on, and Wren slipped between them, invisible by choice and circumstance. But even on the quietest mornings, some rituals refused to overlook anyone. Inside the operations building, the morning routine played out with practiced indifference. Wren stepped into the simulator bay, clipboard tucked under her arm, boots silent on the polished floor. A pair of junior officers, Grant and Burke, lounged by the door, their conversation pausing just long enough to register her approach. Grant's eyes flicked over the patch on her coveralls, then back to Burke with a smirk. "Janitor's early," he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. Wren waited quietly, gaze steady on the simulator access list. She asked if there was an open sluther tone measured, almost apologetic. Burke barely looked up from his phone. "Sim's booked for pilots," he said, letting the word hang in the air. Grant, already keyed up from the morning's flight briefing, decided to make it a show. He tapped at the controls, pulling up the scheduling interface, then turned to Wren with a grin. "Tell you what, let's see what maintenance can do. 2 minutes, solo engagement. Try not to crash the system." A couple of the other pilots drifted over, drawn by the prospect of easy entertainment. The simulator's canopy hissed open, and Wren climbed in, her movements careful, and unhurried. Grant set the scenario: a hostile intercept, minimal prep time, no assistance. He leaned against the console, arms folded, expecting the usual and immediate mistake, a panicked ejection, the kind of failure that would reinforce the unspoken line between pilots and everyone else. The first 30 seconds brought scattered laughter. The digital Apache dropped into a hot zone, warning lights flaring across the panel. Burke nudged Grant, whispering about grease monkeys biting off more than they can chew. Wren's hands moved over the controls, methodical and sure, her focus absolute. She didn't flinch as the simulated threats closed in. She cycled through systems with a precision that silenced the room. By the end of the exercise, the only sound was the cooling fans. The mission timer blinked. Target destroyed. No damage sustained. Grant stared at the readout, his mouth set in a hard line. Burke tried to shrug it off. Beginner's luck. But the others exchanged glances, the mood shifting from amusement to uncertainty. Wren exited the simulator without a word. She collected her clipboard, nodded once, and headed for the hangar. The officers watched her go, their laughter gone, replaced by something quieter and less certain. The ritual had played out as always: dismissal, mockery, a test meant to humiliate. But this time, the outcome lingered in the air, unsettled. Outside, the base returned to its routine. Orders were posted, patrols assigned, and the day moved forward. Yet in the quiet between shifts, the memory of the simulator run stayed with Thema, silent correction to the assumptions that shaped every morning. After the simulator run, the hangar returned to its routine, but something subtle had shifted. Burke lingered by the door, waiting until Wren passed, eyes drawn to the back of her neck as she adjusted her collar. There, just visible above the edge of her shirt, was a faded tattoo, an insignia that didn't belong to maintenance or standard flight crews. Burke squinted, recognition dawning slow and uncertain. The black ink marked her as a member of a joint task force most soldiers only heard about in briefings, a detail that had no business showing up on a mechanic at Fort Rains. Grant caught Burke's stare and followed his gaze, his expression tightening as he pieced it together. He stepped closer, voice low but urgent. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, nodding at the tattoo. Wren didn't answer right away. She closed her logbook, tucking it under her arm, and met his eyes with a calm that made him hesitate. "It's nothing," she said, but Grant didn't believe her. He pulled Burke aside, whispering about classified postings and the odds of someone with that insignia being assigned to routine maintenance. The rest of the crew drifted off, but the conversation between Grant and Burke grew more intense, their voices blending with the hum of the hangar's fluorescent lights. Within the hour, Grant was in the colonel's office, the door closed, his voice muffled behind the frosted glass. He described the tattoo, the way Wren handled the simulator, the precision of her maneuvers, terrain masking, target acquisition, every move executed with a confidence that didn't match her personnel file. The colonel listened, flipping through Wren's record, frowning at the lack of flight hours and the absence of any combat badge. He made a note to pull her original orders, to check if there'd been a mistake or a transfer lost in the shuffle. Back in the maintenance bay, Wren worked in silence, tightening a hydraulic fitting on an Apache's landing gear. The other techs glanced at her with new curiosity, some whispering about the officer's sudden interest. She kept her focus on the task, hands steady, face unreadable. The missed opportunity was clear to anyone paying attention. Her expertise, hidden behind layers of paperwork and assumptions, had been overlooked for months. She'd offered suggestions before, minor tweaks to flight plans, quiet warnings about weather or terrain, but they'd been ignored, dismissed as overstepping. Now, with one detail exposed, the chain of command began to reconsider. The realization came too late for the missions already flown, for the risks taken by crews who could have benefited from her knowledge. Recognition, when it finally arrived, brought its own complications, a shift in how she was seen, a sudden scrutiny that made every movement feel observed. As the day wound down, Wren finished her checks and logged her hours, aware that her place at Fort Rains was no longer invisible. The next morning would bring new routines and new expectations, but for now, she moved through the hangar with the same quiet purpose, waiting to see what would change. The day reached its tipping point when a scout team failed to check in. Radios crackled with static as the operations building filled with tension. Colonel Harris stood at the center of the room, his voice clipped as he demanded a pilot for immediate launch. The usual crew was scattergun, grounded with engine trouble, another out on a supply run, and the rest caught in the confusion of overlapping alerts. The colonel's frustration grew with every passing minute. He barked questions at the staff, eyes scanning for anyone who could get a bird in the air. Wren stepped through the doorway, her uniform streaked with oil, clipboard tucked under one arm. She didn't wait for permission. Instead, she walked straight to the flight board and pulled the cover sheet from tail number 7 Delta, the only Apache prepped for immediate launch. Her movements were deliberate, each action practiced and efficient. She began the pre-flight check, cycling through hydraulics and avionics, her focus unbroken by the raised voices around her. Staff Sergeant Booth caught sight of her at the edge of the bay. At first, he assumed she was just running diagnostics, but then he noticed the way she moved, checking every system, with the kind of attention only a pilot would give. He hesitated, then called out, "You cleared for this, Wren?" She didn't answer, just kept working, fingers flying over the checklist. The colonel strode over, impatience clear in his posture. "We need a pilot, not a mechanic," he said sharply. Wren paused, then pulled her hair back, exposing the tattoo at the base of her neck. The black ink stood out against her skin, an emblem known only to those who'd served on classified joint task forces. Booth's eyes widened in recognition, and even the colonel's tone shifted as he took in the symbol. For a moment, the room fell silent. Booth stepped forward, voice lower now. "Sir, you might want to see her file again." Colonel Harris studied Wren for a long moment, the urgency of the situation pressing in from all sides. He gave a curt nod. "Get that bird in the air." Wren climbed into the cockpit, strapping in with the same calm precision she'd shown in the simulator. She ran through the startup sequence, every movement efficient and unhurried. The ground crew watched as the rotors spun up, the radio crackling with last-minute updates. The colonel stood by the comms console, eyes fixed on the Apache as it rolled onto the tarmac. No one spoke. The tension was a physical thing, pressing against the walls of the operations building. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Wren eased the throttle forward, lifting 7 Delta off the ground. The base held its breath, every eye tracking the helicopter's silhouette as it banked toward the east. They didn't know what waited beyond the perimeter, but they understood something had changed. The next hours would test not just skill, but resolve on both sides of the wire. Wren kept her eyes on the ridge as the radio snapped with static reports of a Humvee pinned down, voices clipped and urgent. She guided the Apache low over the scrub, rotors skimming the dust, the sun throwing long shadows across the valley floor. The call for help had gone out only minutes before, but already the air was thick with tension. Other pilots hesitated, scanning maps and waiting for orders. Wren didn't wait. She keyed her mic, voice flat and direct. "Form on my 6. 2 ships stagger. Radio silent unless you see muzzle flashes." The crew in the chase helicopter fell in behind her, their own nerves tightening as they matched her course. The ambush unfolded below a column of smoke, the Humvee wedged against a dry wash, shapes moving in the brush. Wren banked hard, using the terrain to mask her approach. Enemy fire stitched the air, tracers arcing toward the sound of engines. She dropped the Apache behind a low rise, rotors nearly brushing the scrub, and checked her systems with a glance. The co-pilot's hands hovered over the controls, waiting for her cue. Wren's voice cut through the noise. "Weapons tight. Wait for my mark." She eased the helicopter forward, nose dipping just enough to give her a view of the kill zone. Through the canopy, She counted muzzle flashes, tracked the movement of dismounted fighters circling the Humvee. Her thumb rested on the trigger for the 30 men. "Target, left flank, suppressing fire," she said, and the cannon spat a short, precise burst. The brush exploded in a spray of dirt and shrapnel. Enemy fire faltered as the fighters ducked for cover. The chase ship circled wide, keeping their profile low, waiting for her next order. Ren scanned for the wounded 2 soldiers crawling behind the wreck. Another slumped against the tire. She dropped altitude, using the Apache's bulk to shield the Humvee from the worst of the gunfire. "Prepare for extraction," she said, voice steady. The co-pilot relayed the call, and the crew in the chase helicopter moved into position, doors open, ready to pull the survivors out. A burst of fire cracked from the far ridge. RPG teams repositioning, trying to bracket her approach. Ren swung the helicopter around, presenting a smaller target, and fired again, this time at the high ground. The cannon's impact scattered the attackers, buying precious seconds. She coordinated the extraction with clipped instructions, each word clear and unambiguous. The wounded were dragged clear, loaded into the chase ship, the Humvee crew shouting over the roar of engines. As the last soldier scrambled aboard, Ren gave the signal to pull out. She kept the Apache between the enemy and the retreating helicopters, her eyes never leaving the ridgeline until the radio confirmed all clear. Only then did she break off, banking away from the smoke and chaos, the valley falling silent behind her. The return to base was quiet. The crew rode in silence, shaken but alive, the weight of what had just happened settling in. Ren landed the Apache with the same calm precision she'd shown in the air, shutting down systems as the ground crew rushed to meet them. The others watched her, some with disbelief, others with a new, uneasy respect. The aftermath of the ambush lingered in the air, the memory of what had almost been lost, shaping the mood on the flight line. When Ren brought the Apache in, the base was already waiting. The rotors wound down, dust curling around the skids, and the maintenance crew stood at a distance, silent. No one moved to greet her at first. She powered down the systems, unstrapped, and stepped onto the tarmac with her helmet tucked under one arm. The chase ship landed moments later, medics rushing to the injured pulled from the Humvee, but all eyes kept drifting back to Ren. Colonel Harris pushed through the line, his cap pulled low, expression unreadable. He stopped a few paces from the helicopter and looked her over, searching for any sign of the mechanic everyone had overlooked. The tattoo at the base of her neck was visible now, the black ink catching the last of the evening light. Harris's eyes lingered there, then moved to the crew chief, who gave a small, uncertain nod. The colonel's voice was quieter than usual. "Captain Reynolds," he said, using her call sign for the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Rains. "Report to my office after the medics finish." The word traveled fast. Someone from the operations building repeated it in a low voice, "Captain Reynolds." The pilots who hours earlier had dismissed her as just another wrench now shifted their weight, glancing between each other and the Apache. Burke, still in flight suit, looked like he wanted to ask a question but couldn't form the words. The ground crew kept working, but their pace slowed, ears tuned to every word. Inside the colonel's office, Harris flipped through her file, the pages thin from being handled so often but never truly read. He asked about the mission, her decisions in the air, the way she'd handled the ambush and coordinated the rescue. Ren answered each question plainly, her tone steady, eyes level. There was no embellishment, no need to fill the silence with anything but facts. Harris closed the file, and after a long pause, said, "You're reinstated to flight status, effective immediately. Your experience is needed here." When she stepped back outside, the announcement had already reached the barracks. The official order was posted: Captain Reynolds, Apache pilot, returned to the roster. The crowd that had gathered on the edge of the flight line didn't cheer or clap. Instead, they watched her with a new kind of attention. Some faces showed confusion, others respect, and a few simply tried to reconcile the person they'd ignored with the one who just saved a crew under fire. That night, the base felt different. The usual routines carried on, but conversations shifted. Questions about rank and background gave way to stories about the mission, the rescue, the calm voice over the radio. For the first time, the lines between flight crew, ground crew, and command seemed less certain. The revelation wasn't just about one pilot's hidden skill, but about what the unit had missed by not looking closer. The next morning, the debrief room was quiet. The air heavy, with things left unsaid. After the orders were posted, the atmosphere on base shifted in ways that were hard to name. Wren's return to flight status was official, her name back on the operations board, her call sign spoken aloud by command. Colonel Harris didn't make a speech. He just issued the order, signed it, and moved on. But the weight of his decision rippled quietly through the hangar and across the flight line. The mechanics who had once treated Wren like any other wrench in the toolbox now watched her out of the corners of their eyes. Pilots who'd never bothered to learn her name paused before starting their pre-flights, glancing her way with a new caution. No one said much. There was no ceremony, no handshake, no sudden return to camaraderie. Instead, respect settled over the hangar, and small, quiet moments saw a nod from the crew chief as she passed. A tool left out for her on the workbench. A checklist already marked and waiting by her bird. Wren didn't seek out the attention. She finished her paperwork, logged her maintenance hours, and slipped back into the same routines that had kept her invisible for so long. But the difference was there. When she walked the length of the hangar at dusk, boots echoing on the concrete, people stepped aside without thinking. At the end of the day, she found herself alone with 7 Delta, her Apache, the last light catching on the faded paint. She reached up, gloved hand resting against the fuselage, and let her fingers trace the outline of the old serial number. The gesture was small, almost unnoticed, but it meant something. The respect that had eluded her before now hung in the air, quiet, unspoken, as steady as the evening dew. The pilots gathered in the ready room, spoke in lower voices when she entered. Some of them, the ones who'd seen her in the simulator, or watched the rescue play out over the radio, nodded in acknowledgement. Others kept their distance, unsure how to react to someone who'd gone from background to legend in a single sortie. There were no jokes, no dismissive comments about maintenance. Instead, there was a new willingness to listen when she spoke, to follow her lead when a question about flight plans or emergency procedures came up. Colonel Harris's words echoed through the building. "I flew with a ghost knife once," and the story spread in fragments. The ghost knife insignia at the base of her neck became a quiet rumor, a detail whispered between shifts. The base's assumptions had been upended, and everyone knew it. Wren didn't linger in the spotlight. She returned to the hangar after hours, tools in hand, checking over the Apache the same way she always had. When the night shift rolled in, she was already halfway through the pre-flight, methodical and silent. She didn't need to speak for her presence to be felt. The others fell into step, picking up on her rhythm, no longer questioning her place among them. Nothing about the base's routine changed on the surface. The same orders were posted, the same engines warmed up before dawn. But where Wren had once faded into the background, now every move she made was noticed. The aftermath of the mission lingered in the way people watched her, the way they listened, the way they waited for her to act before deciding what came next. Some changes happen all at once. Others settle in slowly until they become part of the new order. After the rescue, the rhythms of the hangar shifted in ways that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Wren stopped hiding the tattoo at the base of her neck. There was no need to tuck her collar high or keep her hair down. She moved through the bays with her sleeves rolled up, the black ink, a quiet signal to anyone who cared to notice. Mechanics and pilots alike watched her now, not with suspicion or curiosity, but with a kind of measured respect. The old line's flight crew, ground crew, civilian contractor blurred at the edges. Her call sign, Echo, started appearing on the ops board again, penciled in beside simulator slots and maintenance rotations. The simulator bay became a proving ground. New pilots, still flush with confidence from flight school, made their way there to test themselves against the scenario. Ren was often already inside, helmet on, running through startup checks or reviewing system failures no one else bothered to practice. Once, a fresh pilot named Corwin leaned against the wall, loud enough for the others to hear. "Didn't know mechanics got sim time. You planning to mop the floor after?" The room went quiet, eyes flicking between Ren and Corwin. She didn't look up from her checklist. "See you in airspace," she said. And that was the end of it. Corwin lasted less than 3 minutes in the simulator before flaming out on a routine engagement. Afterward, he avoided her eyes, and the others took note. Ren's authority didn't come from rank or orders. It was the way she handled the Apache in the Scimevery checklist completed. Every system failure managed without panic. Every engagement won through timing and patience. When she spoke, it was brief, direct, and never for show. The crews started to listen. They watched how she prepped her bird, how she checked the fuel lines twice, how she ran her hands along the fuselage before every sortie. The mechanics followed her lead, picking up on the details she never explained. Pilots stopped questioning her presence in the cockpit or the sim bay. If Echo was on the schedule, they made sure to be early. The story of the rescue passed from mouth to mouth, stripped of embellishment. No one talked about heroics or medals. Instead, they remembered the calm voice over the radio, the precision of her commands, the way she shielded the Humvee with the Apache's frame. The lesson was clear. Proven skill and quiet resolve counted more than bravado or bravado's noise. Over time, Ren's presence changed the tone of the unit. The laughter in the ready rooms softened. The new pilots learned to watch, to listen, to value the ones who didn't need to announce themselves. Authority shifted from the loudest voices to those who had earned it through action. The old habit of dismissing the quiet ones faded, replaced by a sharper attention to what mattered, who showed up when it counted. This new normal didn't come with ceremony or fanfare. It settled in, slow and steady, until it became part of the background. And as word of Ren's story spread beyond the hangar, it carried with it a different kind of weight, something quieter, but just as lasting. At Fort Rains, the lesson didn't announce itself with ceremony or sweeping orders. It took shape in the way people started paying attention to things they'd always overlook. After Ren's flight, the base adjusted quietly. The mechanics who had once dismissed her as just another wrench began to watch how she ran her hands along the Apache's skin before every sortie. Pilots who had never bothered to learn her name now found themselves checking her notes on maintenance logs, tracing the diagrams she left behind in the ready room. There was no official memo, no policy change from above, just a gradual shift in the way the unit recognized what mattered. The colonel's decision to reinstate Ren to flight status sent a message, even if it wasn't written down. Her maneuvers during the rescue terrain masking, split-second targeting, the way she shielded the Humvee with the Apache's frame, became the new standard for simulator training. Instructors pulled up the footage for the next round of pilots, replaying her approach and asking, "What do you see here?" The answers changed over time. At first, they talked about tactics and timing. Later, they started mentioning the calm in her voice, the way she issued orders without raising it, the trust she inspired in the crew around her. The biggest change happened in the hangar, away from the flight boards and mission briefings. The old habit of ignoring the quiet ones faded. Instead, the crew started to look for the signs they'd missed. The mechanic who double-checked torque specs when no one was watching, the pilot who stayed late to run extra diagnostics, the private who learned every inch of the bird before ever setting foot in the cockpit. It wasn't about rewarding showmanship anymore. It was about finding the people who got the job done when it mattered, even if no one noticed. Second chances became possible in small, practical ways. When someone made a mistake, the question wasn't just about what went wrong, but what else they could do if given the right tools. Ren's own path mechanic to pilot, sideline to lead reminded everyone that talent doesn't always follow the chain of command. The story of her rescue flight didn't just change how people saw her, It changed what they looked for in each other. No speeches marked the shift. Instead, the recognition settled into the daily routine. A nod from a crew chief, a slot reserved in the simulator, a quiet word passed between shifts about who to trust when things went sideways. The lesson was clear. Without ever being spelled out, competence can hide in plain sight, and sometimes the person you least expect is the one you need most. As the weeks went on, the new pilots learned to watch more closely. The veterans kept their stories short and their eyes open, remembering what they'd missed before. The hangar was quieter, but the silence felt different, more attentive, less dismissive. And in that space, a new standard took root. That shift didn't erase the old ways overnight, but it meant that the next time someone overlooked a quiet mechanic or an unassuming crew member, there was always someone else watching, ready to see what others missed. Ren stands at the edge of the hangar, helmet under one arm, watching as another Apache lifts off into the fading light. She doesn't smile or wave. Her presence is steady, her focus unbroken. Around her, the base carries on mechanics, swapping tools, pilots prepping gear, but there's an unspoken acknowledgement now. Skill doesn't fade, and legends don't stay grounded. She keeps working, not for praise or attention, but because the mission needs her. That's what sets her apart. A commitment to serve, no matter who's watching. If you've ever been underestimated, share your story in the comments. For more real human stories, subscribe to the channel